Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a, I guess you could call it review for Tactics Ogre 1 Vision, if it's fair to call it that after like I don't even know how many thousands of hours in this mod, but either way, however long it's been, let's go ahead and talk about the latest version. So I just wanted to go over the sort of changes that I've seen kind of folks asking about when it came to things like the Hanging Gardens, because again, this mod has a tendency to have that reputation of just like being this horrifically difficult, impenetrable thing of like, how can you possibly beat it without knowing all the ins and outs and mechanics and whatever else? And realistically speaking, I want to just kind of not only set the record straight on that being kind of BS, in many ways this is a lot more straightforward than the official versions. But also just kind of give a general review for where the sort of late game is feeling like at this point before getting into all the post game stuff. Okay, so first of all, Hanging Gardens. I just made a bunch of, I guess you could call them pseudo save states all over the Hanging Garden just to kind of show off a few bits and pieces here. For one thing, it's worth noting that as far as the uniforms for the Templars, like this is something that doesn't come up that often. One Vision actually does change the uniforms on the Templars to be a bit more kind of visually distinctive to know kind of who you're targeting when and where. Now these were changes that subtly existed in the official versions. In One Vision they generally make it a bit more obvious of like, okay, look, the guys with the green capes, those are going to be a ranged guys. Sometimes they got guns, sometimes they got bows. The guys with the red frocks on them, those are the ones that are going to be the casters. Over here, the ones that are blue on blue, these are the guys that you want to immediately take out as soon as you see them because those are going to be your monk flavors. But yeah, there's a lot of different versions of them obviously out there, but either way, this color coding generally makes it easier to prioritize your stuff when dealing with the Templars, who notoriously just all kind of blend together because that's kind of the whole point of their getup. But either way, it's nice to be able to tell them apart from a gameplay perspective. For another thing, I just want to point out that this is the first time that I was happily bringing along an Octopus just entirely on its own without even thinking about bringing in any extra support or whatever else. And I gotta say, one of those little kind of unsung little One Vision changes that really absolutely carries here is just how good verses are in the mod at this point. Like, for example, Fridsweed here is my main Valkyrie. She's basically running all lightning type of stuff. And in her particular instance, just having access to that lightning stuff to drop water averses on top of Nyx over here, basically just tanking arrows like nobody's business, basically generating a ridiculous amount of TP and then being able to just kind of squiggle on forward and then just nuke things repeatedly out of the water. It felt really, really good. So like just that lightning averse is basically akin to having the empower effect, and that's just on its own. That's before we throw in like breaches, the actual empower effect, the strengthening effect, and whatever else. Like there's just so many things that you could do to put your fingers on the scale as far as damage is concerned. Basically like a more expansive version of even what was there in Reborn as far as debuffs are concerned. So weird note to start on, but I just really appreciate that. Again, like when it comes to stuff like an Octopus, there's just a lot of things about it that are affected by the mod there, and it's just great to see it functioning as well as it does. So, like, let's say, you have her run forward here, you have her do her zappy zaps to go and inflict a little bit of a verse on somebody. Like, let's go ahead and pick this dude up here. Go ahead and zapify the dude mans and or ladies. I don't know, that part is not distinctive yet. Like, hell, Angel Knights, having access to this right away, just, oh, it's so good. Apparently this guy's got steadfast, so that's a little bit of a shame, but oh well. Kind of throws a little bit of a change in that particular plan. Actually, you know what, come to think of it, just for the hell of it, why don't we go ahead and plume up our Mr. Octo nuke over here, kind of see how this ends up performing in a bit of a moment. But yeah, dude, it's just wild to see how effective these guys are at this point. Just in general, like every single unit has had so much love poured into them at this point. Like the reason that I'm going on about the Octopus is just like even their basic attacks, they're up into whip hands now. Their their ranged attacks are something that the AI is able to use, not just the player. Their water attacks strictly are limited to the water, so in many ways they're more limited than the official versions. But it's not just for the purpose of making it harder for harder water's sake. It's for the purpose of making it so that you actually use them on water maps, but at the same time, it also allows for vastly improving the absolute firepower of these things, to the point that they don't even necessarily need something like a tamer there, and because of the way that monsters were reworked, to be actually similar to Reborn in this particular way, where they're relatively squishy, like their armor is not exactly anything to write home about. But this means that their health pools are much higher, and this also just allows them to generate TP much faster. But so, like, for example, in this particular case, you just have this dude coming in with this frickin' nuke, and look, like, similar units over here, compared with this one, just, like, noticeably extra numbers flying around, whatever else. Even compared with the Breach, it's an improvement. Yeah, I just love this kinds of stuff, so I wanted to say right from the get-go, I never cared much about the water in this particular map until suddenly this octopus was here to just fully carry the beginning. So I love that little detail. Additionally, as far as the gear loadouts for all these people are concerned, this is definitely the most consistent kind of Templar army throughout the series, where they're going to be running basically the same stuff throughout all of Hanging Gardens here. And this includes things like these combos right here, where they'll occasionally just have kind of varied up weapons for the purpose of, just kind of either taking advantage of different effects or just looking cool next to each other or whatever else. They're not exactly heavily optimized. That is one of those things that's oftentimes misunderstood about One Vision, is like, when something's custom designed, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's like fully giga optimized for maximum butthurt all the time. It's essentially redesigned in such a way that everything feels like, that feels like the series should. So you do get a lot of rule of cool kinds of stuff, and I would say in general... Oh, wait, why do I have two of these saves? Hold on. Pulled up the wrong one. So you do get a lot of those moments that I would say feel most similar to if the people that made Knight of Lotus made Locked, basically. Like, that's more or less what it comes down to. Okay, so as we carry on through the gardens that are hanging, apparently I skipped a few parts, but oh well. Stuff like Last Stand, there's one guy in particular that I just thought was a really cool kind of custom edition here, which, by the way, shout out to the dual rapier guy over here going and sniping people, but this one in particular was one of those custom units that I thought was pretty neat, just like the most badass Dragoon you've ever seen coming in with a magnum and an axe. Oh man, this guy's just like rocking his Bloodborne build over here. So I loved that. And I will say in general, again, this has been the most consistent version of this one by a pretty decently hefty chunk here. I'm trying to find the Enduris fight. I'm sure I had a save of Enduris on there somewhere, because this is... Let's see, maybe it's here? It feels like about here. Are you Enduris? No, this is the Undead Last Stand. Oh yeah, this was a cool moment. Did you know that the AI can actually cast Paranoia at this point? I actually didn't know that they could do that. There's not really a whole lot of point for them to do that, but they can cast Paranoia. For those that don't know, this is a debuff that's technically always been in all versions. It's just never really had much of a purpose. Let's go over and mouse over to it real quick like. So their actions and movement cannot be controlled, refuses all aid from allies. So it's basically like Charm, but not really. Like, it's kind of like Charm, but it's just them becoming an AI character. Like, they're still on your side, they'll still fight for your side, they just don't really trust you anymore, which is kind of interesting. They become a guest. So kind of an interesting status ailment you never really see normally. It feels like they could have done a lot more with that, but whatever. It's interesting to see that happening there. So you never really see that used. So I just thought that was a bit of a cool moment. But let's see, we need probably about 29-ish. I feel like maybe it's here. I know this is not exactly the most ideal way to handle this, but still. Oh yeah, so Phoenix Hell was actually really solid here. So just like always, it's the same old strategy for Phoenix Hell, but one thing that I did appreciate is just the amount of play that their different abilities have at this point. So, okay, you have the usual issue of them starting off near empowering units and stuff like that. However, One thing that is interesting is that between their fire, between their improved fire, between their different status moves and feather steps and whatever else, they actually have enough movement that the typical bind tricks don't necessarily work on them here. So that's pretty cool. You can technically still leaden them and throw them off something, but you have to have brought along a heavy unit to do it, because one of the kind of restrictions in the PSP version is that heavy units are actually immune to knockback unless the thing knocking them back is as large as they are. So it has to be only beast units that are knocking back other beast units. So there is a very niche case where instead of the archers being the ones to throw stuff off in this particular map, theoretically, if you are speedrunning this whole thing, it might actually be worthwhile to bring along your Cyclops for this one, in order to have them train with Bash and then just like leaden Bash in order to knock these guys down. So kind of an interesting little tidbit there. But yeah, even that fight, like, they've done a very good job of keeping all the kind of like fights generally consistent across the board. And this is true again of the entire thing at this point. So let's see, we got 1331 over here, 135154. I feel like maybe here-ish. If this isn't Enduris, we're just going to move on to the final fight there. Yes, it is Enduris. Okay, so Turbo Chicken. Just to point this out, this chicken just acted. So, like, never underestimate the power of Turbo Chicken. But just like in Reborn there, the answer to claiming the stairs early is still the chicken. However, due to everybody's increased movement range, you actually can take the stairs with relative comfort. And additionally, Turbo Chicken just can gladly outspeed everything here. But additionally, it's worth noting that Enduris, while generally pretty tough, and while still doing his charging ahead thing, he's actually still... not only is he as mortal as his lack of shirt would imply, but due to the extended range of healers in this one, he actually does end up backing up his whole thing of charging in ahead first. Because typically the way that this seems to play out is the golems surround you from both sides. The dragons then drop breath repeatedly to make this, in particular, your sort of kill zone instead of down here. So it's like a little bit farther ahead from the usual ones, but then this guy, with a combination of the fact that you want to get at him, serves as not only the bait, but also the sort of initial AoE to then be further backed up by his other AoEs over here, as well as his archers back here as well, who come in with, well, one of which comes in with a siege bow, so those have a tendency to have some pretty crazy long range. But yeah, this party in general was pretty darn legit. However, in this particular case, what I ended up doing is I ended up sending the chicken in order to go distract everybody up here, to try to sort of pull everybody off to the side. And that did end up having a pretty decent effect overall, of just kind of like allowing this fight to be dismantled and whatnot. So either way, in general though, I love the Enduris fight pacing at this point. Nothing too crazy to write home bad about this guy. Like, he isn't force equipped with his custom claws or anything, unless you are the appropriate level for him to actually spawn with them. But he does come with a double attack. He does come with overpower and dual wield and blood price and stuff like that. So if you do have a particularly heavyweight party that's really weak to spells, there's a pretty solid chance that he's just going to be able to nope that shit immediately. Since blood price is basically like just meditate, kind of like classic meditate in many ways. But actually, no. Blood price is the TP one. I'm thinking about blood magic. Sorry, was recently going through dealing with the shaman and whatnot. Okay, Ivory Tower though, he does have the ability to become immune to hits if you do get him completely overwhelmed. Though he doesn't oftentimes tend to use that. So thankfully, like, I didn't see him use it more than once, so it doesn't have a tendency to be an annoying spam fest, as it were. Anyways, though, let's go ahead and just kind of continue on through the final fight here, and then just talk about favorite builds from this playthrough, because I've been asked repeatedly to go and share the builds that were used, to share some kind of like current favorites, just kind of all that the party's been up to and whatever else, so we'll go ahead and do that. So for one thing, By a not even remotely close margin, my favorite thing on Denim has been the Warlock. Now, I've changed weapons on him constantly. Sometimes he was running around with a pistol, sometimes he was walking around with an instrument, sometimes he was walking around with, I was trying spears on him with other classes, but, like, in this particular place, I mentioned before, I had gotten Final Fantasy X recently on the Vita, and basically was just playing through that. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and give him the weapon that I know I'm going to put on Tidus when we go and remake that team for the themed Iron Man runs. So the Varanastra over here basically is the Brotherhood for all intents and purposes. But anyways, as far as the final boss is concerned, like this guy is fast, like ridiculously fast at this point, as you can tell. So it is generally one of these cases where I can see the actual full party approach being the one you want to go with, because it is very difficult to get Denim to the point of actually being able to solo this guy. I did it out of stubbornness, but just know that that the classic approach of just trying to go full infinite tank mode, very difficult to pull off. Like in his particular case, the only reason that this worked, and this is like barely that it worked, is due to the fact that I ran into this fight. It was initially impossible. However, when the Vit rebalance had happened, I had gone and made a stack of like 50 dragon sticks. And so I had gone and bought all those things, and basically they just sat in the inventory because I used a couple on everybody and figured, whatever, close enough. So it was a combination of that on top of his very specific kind of loadout here of going extremely high evasion, but kind of relatively low on weight here. But also sticking with the Raider Vest in order to give him pretty decent defenses against most things. On top of the crown here for being able to, just do the whole resistance thing. Because if it wasn't for the high resistance, high resistance and high, just kind of hard armor, he would have been pretty thoroughly dunked on here. Anyway. Basically, the strategy was more or less to go onto this one particular pillar over here where there's a one-tile area that he can't reach, use a double movement, a combination of his natural movement being slightly faster than the usual movement range of the boss, on top of teleportation. So I got a lot of magic stuff on this guy, but I'd picked up teleportation on my way into the final fight there. I want to say I grabbed it in Palace of the Dead somewhere. I don't remember. But either way, he could basically double move using this. So it just takes his regular move, then a teleport move, and this was just enough to get him over to this pillar. He spent the entire first phase of the fight scarfing down something like 50 food items. Because again, I was just determined to do this out of stubbornness to say that it could be done. And then was alternating between Acid Rain for taking advantage of the lightning weakness, inflicting that lightning weakness courtesy of Arc, getting a water weakness from Arc, then going and converting that that weakness back to a lightning weakness with water, and then all the times in between, he would end up either putting up a spell guard shield from down here, which basically just makes him immune to the only attacks that this guy is able to do at this distance, or throwing out tear gas bombs in order to then further waste more of his time, which should do a pretty decent amount of damage themselves. So basically a combination of spamming all of these over and over and over while also using Distill Life from over here, as well as Distill Remedy allowed him to offset, for example, the Dark Deeds effect that this guy has. So I should probably explain what this guy's skills even are, because on top of being fast as hell, he can basically two-shot Denim at this point, but he also has access to Radius, Umbra, Exhaustio, and Evil Deeds. So these three you've probably seen in the official versions, but he generally was not getting his TP high enough to do that. If you stayed far away enough, he absolutely would, and then it's just bye-bye at that point. So I needed to stay in a position where he still technically could be targeted, but also technically could get to the point of limiting his melee attacks. His melee attacks he has pretty much perfect evasion for, going down to 25% hit odds, but eventually one of those would hit when he's swinging like 7 times in a row. So, as a result, Evil Deeds as well as Draconics were the main thing that he was using, because the armor loadout that I have on Denim at the moment makes him very good at resisting standard standard spells. He wasn't focusing too hard on stuff like Drain Heart because he's pretty aggressive. He would use the occasional Cerberus summon, but most of those would typically plink off because of his armor, as well as typically he would just alternate between Aura and Demon, essentially just kind of spamming those two back and forth to take advantage of the averse bonus that each one was granting. So anyways, this combination of putting up a spell shield, trying to get that 12% dodge chance on Draconics, and then just repeatedly just kind of like spam healing using items, whatever else, was more or less what eventually got the job done. So this took a little bit of a hot minute, but eventually, through enough patience, he was able to be soloed using this message. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is a way to get it done. Anyway, though, we're just going to go ahead and skip this part to go talk about some builds. Sorry, chugging some coffee here. Because, yeah, when it comes to One Vision, obviously, it is a game of just absolute build porn, like, from top to bottom. It's entirely about getting those builds going, just like any kind of creative builds that you'd like. Like in this particular case, just to give you an idea of how many different iterations this potentially went through. There were times that I was trying to do a just like high physical evasion, mute him with a tear gas bomb, go for the Agony spell, which allows you to do damage based on how close to the middle of your health bar you are, then using Distill Life in order to recover, and then attempt to dodge hard enough to be able to recover out of that. If a regeneration was set up before the fight started, this is then allowed to theoretically be able to do this about 5 times in a row, which would get the job done. And he was very close. He was very close to actually getting that done on multiple occasions, but then would just end up getting unlucky because, again, even at 25%, those odds are eventually going to, eventually backfire. So, so ultimately, that just wasn't really the way to go, though it could theoretically work with enough attempts. We had another attempt of just trying to fight through, using typical sword and board kind of stuff. And while the guy's natural evasion is pretty friggin' up there, with something like a dagger, he was doing a pretty decent job of actually going and hitting the guy. Obviously, you can't shackle him. That's the main effect of the main gauche, of just like you have really high evasion, but no real hard defense from it. But it does give you increased parry odds, as well as being able to actually shackle most things, but he is not one of those things, so it is what it is. Also, I love that Denim's here to show up for this particular cutscene. It's just kind of a cool thing. All right. Now, let's go ahead and continue on here. I was kind of curious what ending I got. Of course, it was the princess ending. Now, let's talk favorite moments. We'll get to the builds. But favorite moments throughout this entire thing have just been non-stop. Like, the first things that came to mind were back all the way in Chapter 2. It started with the dang greased boots on the Terranite that was in the aqueduct there. And in that particular case, those items weren't anything particularly fancy, but they were still a case of just this kind of special feeling that, again, goes back to that feeling that Night of Lotus gave me, like all those years back. I was like, here's this one movement item. It's nothing particularly fancy. It's just like some snow boots or something, but just this one thing that fundamentally alters something about your characters, gives you something new to build around. And those greased boots, like, their whole effect is just they're a little bit of extra vitality, they're very lightweight, they're moderate defense, okay? They're an okay item, statistically speaking, but they also give you a self-cast of water walking / resilient, okay? And it's oddly specific, but this is an item that ended up changing hands over and over and over the course of my playthrough. Originally being on a beast tamer that was regularly getting bullied by casters and having a hard time getting into the water to go get the octopi that he was trying to recruit. So this ended up being a perfect fit for him. Over time, it then ended up moving over to a Terranite who I wanted to be able to attack from the water. Eventually, that Terranite ended up becoming my my Angel Knight, but long before then, it ended up switching hands again, eventually going to Olivia as the team archer, being somebody that would now be able to walk out into the waves and just go shoot from the water, you know? And it was just cool to see, like, this little basic-ass item there was just one of. There was just finding new roles throughout the entire playthrough, you know? And every item has been designed that same way. Again, just going back to that kind of classic Tactics Ogre kind of feeling. And again, something they partially reclaimed in Reborn. But I always love that in RPGs where you just have an item that was not very much, like statistically it might be out of date, but just you can always find some new creative use for it later, you know? And we'll get more on, you know, on those items in a bit, but that in particular really did it for me. The early access to basically every type of sword, diagonal whips, being able to again be used on Terror Knights is just fantastic. That first moment of going into Farampa Wildwood and having my Valkyrie that was running sword and board up to that point lose a fight consistently. Like we were talking about, probably a couple hours long map, specifically the lake map in Farampa Wildwood, the one that's like kind of on the right and a little bit down, the one with all the ninjas and stuff. Actually, hold on. Let me blow my nose real quick. So, back to the dagger and sword story. So yeah, I was going through Farampa at that point, and just seeing this really cool moment of this random unit with a dagger repeatedly outfighting my Valkyrie there, just off of that little edge in speed. It's not something you need to consider all the time, but when they were both that closely matched. Also, wait a minute, I just noticed Murden and Gildas, they got different hairdos and stances in this particular scene. Like, they still use their same stuff, but they got different hairdos? The fuck? Anyway, sorry, that's kind of random. I never really stared at this one before. I gotta double check and Reborn if that's still the case. Okay. Also, wait a minute. Wasn't this ship brown before? Is it black now? Huh. Was it always black? I gotta double check this. Okay, whatever. Note for later. Where the hell were we? So yeah, that dagger story. Like, just the fact that the two of them were basically near identical copies of each other, minus this one weapon change, and it caused this moment that this other Valkyrie could repeatedly use HP infusion after outspeeding them with a dagger, meaning that she could consistently outheal anything that was done, caused an entire stalemate on one flank of the map because neither of those two could be moved, and they were kind of the linchpin that would allow any kind of flanking through the water there. So it's just cool to see this fight going on, you know, on the shore itself. You got a couple of sword masters up there at the very top having a sword fight, and then these two just having an impossible duel in the middle of the river. One's repeatedly auto healing with their HP infusion and their knife. The other one's occasionally taking turns to go chug down a salve. Like, it's just, oh man, it's just interesting to see that, like, that particular fight going on. Okay, let's see. We got that. I mean, multiple moments with Canopus. Frankly, I cannot look at Murden right now and not see that one guy that I can't remember his name of, but like the guy that's always at the front of the group in the Bee Gees. Like, go way to show your age, I suppose, but like, look up the song Staying Alive and look at the guy that's singing at the very front. Tell me that doesn't look like him with his diagonal sprite over there. Anyway, sorry, back to it. So yeah, other interesting story, like Canopus, like, every time he took a staircase was memorable. Who are we kidding? Like, that dude is the master of staircases. Let's see. We had, well, Sarah ended up having quite a career as the team rogue. She ended up passing away quite some time later in Palace of the Dead, actually. We're going to assume that he's leaving that for her as well, which Asleston is still currently in the party, but we're going to attend his funeral anyway. Yeah, for those that never recruited Asleston, he doesn't exactly make it in the post-game, technically, even though he's happily there fighting with you, but it is what it is. But you get to let him have a retirement, and I love the little detail, by the way. This is actually one of those things that doesn't necessarily carry over as well when they redid the visuals for Reborn. I don't know if this was an intentional thing, but the way that they sort of like black and white intro into the screen in the PSP version makes it look like he has a skull when you're initially starting up here. Just kind of something to do with the shading on his head. And kind of the way that he's sort of tipped over towards the front there. But anyway. Okay, so continuing on, let's see, in kind of no particular order, around around chapter 3 when I ended up putting in the Furia in the team. That was really memorable as well, because while I didn't get Aircell this playthrough, I did end up making a generic Aircell instead. Just having this archer that could teleport on top of rooftops, basically. Like, they're more or less like an archer with a grappling hook and lightning powers. It was just really cool from a traversal standpoint, so that was really neat to see. Man, I feel like I'm going to have more of these directly coming up as we carry on through the story. Oh yeah, the generic soldier guy that I always end up bringing up, Mr. Shield guy, the enforcer. Yeah, like that particular meme started off back all the way back in chapter 2, because I just wanted to see what would happen if I started using units completely wrong. So we had things like, you know, the dagger and buckler archer, and sure enough, they had those poison shurikens for a while. That was that actually isn't the case anymore. The poison shuriken did end up getting removed, and switched out for other abilities over the course of this whole thing. I think they have the stun rock at this point, so it's still just as good with tremendous shot. So that whole build can still technically work, but either way, the javelin throwing soldier just, it initially again started off as just the typical, you know, I gotta try to do the opposite of everything that makes sense just in case it starts to make sense, kind of thing. And in his case, it wound up working very well because, so the vigorous attack version that we get in One Vision is a true strike and dodge on everybody around, and that dodge buff is super potent. To give you an idea of how potent buffs are on their own in this version, compared with the other ones, like instead of, let's say, Reborn's locked in 30%, instead of the PSP versions, haha, you wish, like, you wish this did something more than give you happy thoughts. What we have in this version is, like, for that final boss, I didn't show the debuff hit odds, but, like, Denim, even with a decent mind score, was like 43% hit odds. With most of his basic debuffs, that went up to 96% with Spell Strike, and that typically lasts like I think it's like 5 to 8 rounds, depending on the item. So they tend to last quite a decently long time. But that point is, that dodge true strike thing, very, very useful. When Steadfast got added to heavy shields, like originally I used that shield as just a way to give him a guaranteed stun melee attack, and it was pretty alright. It wasn't like a lot of damage or anything, but his purpose was to find that gap in the middle of, let's say, some friendly soldiers there. He would sit in the middle, he would give them buffs. If there's an opening, he walks forward, he takes it, he uses his Rampart Aura and stuff like that to block the area. He goes and he stuns something, and then the others pull up kind of behind him. So he's kind of just like, more or less just ramming his way through, so to speak. And then over time, I ended up giving him Bash, so that we still essentially got back that knockback effect for the shield. So he still had the knockback effect, he had the guaranteed stun. At that point, it became clear that it was very useful for him to start recruiting things, so he started doing that quite a bit as I knock over the same pile that I swear to God I've knocked over in like 7 videos now. Pile of CDs. Why can I not stop kicking you, and why haven't I put you in a place that makes more sense? I don't know. I don't know. I'm talking to CDs. Moving on. So, let's see. You know, actually, I think at this point we've more or less covered that we're getting the good ending here. We've covered most of the ending scenes. Let's get to builds and the story behind all these peoples, shall we? Yes, yes. Thank you, director guy. I need to look up whatever that guy also directed, because I feel like they've probably also directed other cool things. Anyway, yes, yes, to be continued. Now, can we continue with the continuing so that we can continue? Thank you. Like to see that. Which, by the way, I think the video after this is probably going to be showing off what's different in the post-game in the Japanese version. Any darn ways, let's go over these builds and what they do. So, I already went over the benefits of Denim Warlock over here. Now, why Warlock instead of Lord? Because I do want to point out, even though we are on the Princess route, we do have access to Lord, Ranger, Priest. We have everything on him, okay? So if you ever wanted White Knight Denim, it's there. If you wanted Priest Denim, it's there. If you wanted Ranger Denim, it's there. As well as the Death Knight, which is Diebold's unique class. Now, in this particular instance, like, I eventually had to settle on something for the guy. Like, I was going and hopping from class to class. I was like, fine, just like, fuck it, I love the warlock. And the reason for that is just those distill abilities from before. The ability to just use basic items on command and just miraculously use them out of nowhere. He basically has tactical band-aids, and that is a surprisingly useful skill, especially when, for example, used in conjunction with Agony. That's where this originally started from, where he actually started off as a wind warlock. So what I would do is, let's say, would go spam tornadoes and give people the ability to fly with hover draft. Use things like sky pillars to go essentially break past heavy bosses, and then would try to finish them off with agony, which basically the amount of missing HP. Is how much damage this is going to do, and so he was generally the one preferred when it came to taking on HP cards or just getting kind of any physical bonuses. But in particular, this again scales off the middle of his bar, which means that in this case it can do a maximum hit of 220 straight past armor, which is very kind of oddly specifically useful in a lot of situations. And this is a spell that you basically have access to in Chapter 3. This ended up pairing in particularly well with the Cavankino, which is an instrument that was kind of where he maxed out as far as that went. And then I decided, you know what, I don't have any water users, I need my traditional quench user, and so I switched him over to water. And as you saw, as far as ranks are concerned, he started off training with 1 HKs at the very foot of Hanging Gardens. He is already at rank 3. He started training in water at the same time. Like, I, for no apparent reason, just went and traded out a lot of his skills right at the very end, because in general, he's so competent with items and support spells and stuff like that, he can just kind of take on new hobbies. So, as far as that stuff goes, just perfect. Absolute perfection, as far as I'm concerned. I mentioned the story before as far as Olivia is concerned, but in her particular case, she wound up being a fairly basic archer. However, the Raider Vest ends up working, again, pretty darn well in her case, as it doesn't give you any notable kind of scaling damage type of bonuses. Then this particularly matters in terms of not getting targeted by typical, like, let's say, Fusiliers or Archers as much. They will prefer attacking other units, which gives her more free reign to just keep on shooting. However, in her particular case, I actually didn't use any of the sort of traditional type abilities that we usually put on archers, like your double shots or your tremendous shots or stuff like that, instead preferring a sort of a speed trick shooter approach on her. So we got Art of War for silencing and stunning arrows, bows for obvious reasons, jump in order to go and climb up on top of better locations, overpower for shooting past deflection, which actually, honestly, I kind of would have expected this to be ranked up more, because she was shooting pretty regularly. Trajectory for improving her accuracy, and it's really this combination of trajectory and Eagle Eye that really served her particular build here. Because again, she was not necessarily going for high single power shots or whatever else, she was really just kind of shooting out status debuffing arrows and taking those big hits where they landed. Bear in mind that she has hit potentially up to like 300s before, even with her basic bow shots. So while a double shot would potentially help in those particular situations, more often than not it was her combination of Augment Ice as well as her Ice Bow as well as Absolute Zero over here that all ended up synergizing particularly well to have a unit that spent most of her time taking opportunity shots and then looking to shut stuff down with the stop ability. So before then, and part of the reason that she was actually picked as the replacement for the Archer, which partially was because the Archer had saved her life, but also was because she came in with Augment Water. So originally Morpheus actually served that same role as Augment Ice. Then once I got the Ice Bow, this ended up switching to an Augment Ice build. Field Alchemy for keeping herself healed up, worst case scenario. Teratology, which was meant to help her shoot down griffins and such, but that really has not come up that much. It's mostly because this thing has a 20% beast bonus, so with Teratology that absolutely scales like a mofo, but unfortunately that did not end up coming up that often in her case. So it is what it is. Now, next was sort of the Swiss Army knife of basic soldiers that are doing nothing close to what their typical job description was supposed to entail, and that would be this dude. So in his particular case, again, we talked about the shield, heavy armor, and grappling hook before. Ring of Alacrity to offset the fact that their ranged accuracy is absolutely piss poor. I did notice, I was running this guy with what was it, with the power armor for the longest time, the dynamo plate. And while this does slightly improve his offensive potential, it just wasn't really... I don't feel like it was necessarily helping him that much. In general, it seemed like that vitality bonus helped him out a lot more, just kind of in general, so I ended up switching back over to that. Again, overpower for just getting different status effects off. And this guy's a kind of like a walking use case for why the sidearm category is so good, and like why he was picked for this particular role. Because while it originally started off with just throwing javelins, those ended up getting a hobble effect over time. We have the bind effect over on the bola variants. We have a breaching effect over on the axes. We have a slowing effect over on the blades. Like, this gives him a ton of play. Sometimes he needs more range. Sometimes he needs a particular debuff. You know, sometimes he needs this, that, or the other thing. So this made him a very versatile type of build. So I really enjoyed him for that particular purpose. We have Fritzvied, the Valkyrie over here. Heavy armor. Ring of Alacrity for just high accuracy in general. Honestly, not necessarily for accuracy as much as evasion. It's really the avoidance that this thing's used for in this case. Flame and Void for improving her blitz damage. Caldia just for the charm effect on hit. And effectively what she is somebody that spams grenades. So we've got our throwing grenades as part of her inbuilt class functions there. If we go over to her skill list, she's got access to Field Alch 2, so full access to grenades as well as maximum healing items. And then from there, she just basically turns on Fated Circle whenever she can, finds an awkward position near the front to sit and absolutely tank and parry and whatever else. She's both a hard and evasion parrying kind of tank situation. Counter hit for the purpose of dropping that charm on somebody. Augmenting lightning for the obvious reasons of she's shooting out lightning. Blitz cannot miss, but her typical spells can. Either way, this combination of a high parry as well as this dagger over here keeps her weight relatively medium, despite the fact that she is a heavy armor kind of unit. She has a guaranteed charm, guaranteed hits, guaranteed support abilities, as well as guaranteed poison, silence, and stun available from her grenades through Field Alchemy. And oftentimes what she would do is throw out grenades as well as just take out a HP infusion loan on her health in order to basically just never go down. Like, this particular unit hasn't... She lost a few lives early on, and she did lose that one fight versus the Valkyrie in the woods, but, like, since then, she has not taken a loss, simply put, because this build is so freaking powerful. We're going to start off with Arabella the monk over here, because I just really love the idea of the parry monk. Now, she is shockingly unlucky as far as her actual parry rolls go, but still, she's functioned decently well. Having that additional hitting power from that combat staff is pretty potent. Parry in general, while it has rolled decently enough to rank her up, it hasn't really saved her as much as you'd kind of hope, because one of the main things that would attack them would be things like griffins, and she doesn't always end up parrying them, so there is that too. But oftentimes this means that she can get up close to use a tabula rasa and still be at least reasonably confident that she'll be able to put out a little bit of ass kickery later. Usually she'll prefer using a consecrate over a mother's blessing, seeing as that's usually enough overall healing to keep things up and running. A combination of augment light as well as consecrate is usually enough to get at least half a heal out of a basic heal here, so pretty darn solid stuff there. However, she's also going to be running Field Alchemy 2 on the off chance that she ends up getting silenced and doesn't have the TP to be able to do anything else, because she's usually the one more likely to use finishers. The second healer I had over here, the one that I ended up switching over to the Priest class, just kind of cheated it over on her to test it a bit more, was actually the total opposite. She preferred going for Absorb MP as well as Efficacy in order to be able to, as well as her Meditate book, in order to alleviate any MP issues that this class had. And then effectively she's a frontline exorcist kind of thing. The higher mind score on the Sybil as well as this spellbook build made it to where her basic heals don't even require Mother's Blessing. So in general she's been really good there. Stuff like Fell Seal is excellent for dealing with undead units. Stuff like Turn Undead certainly exists. Honestly, even on full undead maps, I just haven't really found much use for this. But hey, whatever. It's cool. It's a cool idea. It's there. I mean, honestly, Fell Seal is just... like cracked powerful, so I love that. It's basically a guaranteed, hey, you're undead. Guess what? You're a statue, kind of a move. And yeah, it lasts for what feels like forever. Last time that this was used was back in the Undead Last Stand in the final area there. And man, oh man, like there was one knight unit that was basically petrified on round 2 and was still a statue by the end of the fight. So either way, really good stuff. Okay, next is the Angel Knight. Now this guy. I love the Angel Knight. I love the fact that it's an actual promotion now, because it was definitely lacking that particular vibe in, well, both Reborn and the PSP version, because what we have in this case is a unit that basically can be promoted into from just, like, it feels like just about anything. Whether it's your casters, whether it's your more offensive units who could just go and spec into Draconics, your swords, spears, hammers, katana, cudgels, instruments, sidearms, or bow or crossbow users, all of them end up finding a place here. But additionally, it's the fact that they have access to anatomy that really matters here, because it basically just gives them a second weapon skill. And like, this is a benefit that was there for a lot of different unit types. Like, let's say as any kind of like skeletons or lizards or whatever else that you ran into, having access to anatomy is a rare thing, but it also means that in many cases it allows them to get a lot better use out of weapons like this. So anatomy has actually been nerfed from the PSP version, in that it's basically just double stacking your weapon skill. It doesn't give you that free armor anymore. But all the same, it means that they more or less just have a free slot now, that this spear might as well be a two-handed spear. This shield is just basically free avoidance for him, and they're the first heavy flyer you get, meaning that you got heavy armor plus a ring of vigor, and this guy ain't going anywhere. So they're also able to heal, they're also able to recruit, they're also still able to punish undead and stuff like that, and you got a nice little suite of moves like Day of Reckoning, which will go and basically just completely empty bar everything around you, getting rid of recovery time, resetting it to nothing, so massive slowdown, gets rid of all TP and MP, just basically reset them to 0, which is really, really cool. So you got that as well, and seeing as these kinds of spears right here have a mind bonus on them, it helps to land those particular skills. Now, those ones honestly were not as important to me personally as it was to just have a really heavy flyer with a heal ability, because that extra mind score on him was already enough to have a pretty solid healer, so really loved that. Like, just the sheer invincibility factor of this thing always reminds me of this one Armored Core 4 Answers scene that they used in the trailers of the Noblesse Oblige. Just basically like flying into the middle of in the middle of a city, and just like a bunch of stuff's bouncing off their shield as they're flying with their angel wings. Like, that's more or less what comes to mind for this guy. Okay, then we got Derek the Terror Knight. Already showed him before. Basically, typical Terror Knight type shenanigans. Fearful Impact, Lament of the Dead, which at this point does Curse and Weaken, as well as a Shadow Break to explode stuff, but he's using Fearful Impact on a whip, and it attacks sideways, and that's pretty neato. And, yeah, aside from that, he'll occasionally use his Drain abilities, but for the most part, he is there to just constantly spam debuffs in the front row, so works decently well. Murden the White Knight, he was the kind of the accurate one of the two White Knight brothers. They're not brothers, but whatever, they call themselves brothers. But he's got his high accuracy two-hander, he's got his Seal of Alacrity, he's got his Augment Earth to improve that sword a little bit, but he's primarily using that high accuracy to spam Time of Need, Shell Bust in order to break out of debuffs, and then from there, just use debuffs as, as needed. Meanwhile, Gildas on the other side is going all in for the anti-undead flavor with the Coronal Mace, getting a little bit of extra accuracy from this Bergenette, going for a little bit more of a heavy armor flavor with his shield, saving that steadfast slot on him there, get a bit more parry going, but basically just that hammer into Fervor consistently can absolutely crush undead stuff, so personally, I just found that just really reliable on him. Additionally, because his range is a bit more limited, his speed is a bit more limited due to his bulk, he will be running Sun Spear and Halo over here. Then we've got Hobrim with his usual, like, there's really not too much you need to do with him. But with the With his particular instance, he's repeatedly spamming off for soul strikes, as you'd kind of expect. Soul strikes, discords, all of that sort of thing. I did have him running with a side-graded sword for the longest time. I believe he was between upgrades at this point, is what's going on here. Because, yeah, I think it was the time and tide that I meant. No, no, no. Let's see. He's got the Ataraxia now. What was the next one that he was going for? One of them. Here, let's see. Maybe it was Time and Tide that I was waiting on. I know I was waiting to upgrade him at some point. I feel like... Yeah, I feel like the Time and Tide is probably what he wants to go for here. Because that additional speed is really useful on him. But I don't remember if I dedicated any additional slots to... I don't think I did. But just, yeah, speed plus absorb MP off of the lighter swords there means that he can usually get in a position, absorb MP repeatedly, go for those soul strikes. He does lose a little bit of power, but the Ataraxia was probably the first time that he used it because I had a bit of a lack of any kind of meaningful upgrades as far as these swords went. Anyway. Canopus, nothing too particularly fancy here, but Lightning Axe to take advantage of the water spells. Keeps a crown on him to improve the ability to hit on these water spells. But he likes spamming Corrosion on anything slightly heavier, like spamming Ripple on anything that likes to dodge, and then just kind of dodge tanks everything else, as you'd kind of expect. Also, one quick pause here, just to... let's get back to it here. So, yeah, Donalto, pretty basic stuff. You got the robe, you got the caster gloves, but swapping out the int ring for a bit of vigor and a light shield, as well as I was running the railbow on him for the longest time. Switched him over to mind crossbows instead, so those are the poison ones. Reason for this is just kind of better debuff odds in general. Now, his debuff landing odds are like mediocre. His spell damage is but the combination of his kind of unique finisher over there in the form of the Aramin, as well as oops, well, I probably shouldn't have done that. Anyway, as well as all this other stuff, just generally makes it so that he's kind of okay across the board. He's mostly a support guy, what has to be understood here, though. So, like, for example, you could go a little bit more offensive by giving him a, like, mind focus. You could potentially go a bit more evasive by giving him a phantom cloak and stuff like that. But generally, stuff like having a robe on him for completely getting rid of caster damage. Something like a sage robe over there to give him the ability to have at least some decent punch with his spells. Ring of Vit to hopefully dissuade any kind of incoming arrows and stuff like that definitely helps. And this is kind of before we realized that I apparently at some point completely whiffed it and did not give him the Seal of Vit, just kind of the Ring of Vit. So, way to go there. Now, one other way to actually go about this would probably just be to go Seal of Wisdom on him. It's generally a pretty solid answer, since Wisdom is one of the ones that's classed as defensive. For those that didn't know, in One Vision, rings are generally classed as, like, one of two things. So, for example, like, a Seal of Alacrity is neutral and just kind of gives you a little bit of everything, whereas, let's say, a Seal of Finesse is generally a more offensive thing and will give you Dexterity and Attack bonus. Something like Vigor will give you both Defense and Vitality. Whereas, let's say, something like Seal of Might, which, let's say in the official versions, would potentially be used as both a strength and a defense bonus. In this case, it's primarily an offensive thing instead. So, like, you would get some physical bonus off of that strength, but something like Vit is noticeably different from a strength ring. So, anyways, that's all well and good. Moving on to the next one. Actually, I should probably point out, like, Donalto, the fact that he was able to go and turn people into zombies actually saved a lot of people on this particular team. Actually, over the course of this playthrough, let's go see how many casualties there were. So there were 24 casualties in the party, which will be remembered in various different ways. But yeah, it was definitely far from a casualty-free run. And it's also worth noting, like, I did everything that you could pretty much do by the end of Chapter 4, so this is not going to be a typical run before somebody starts immediately writing a comment like, oh my god, I don't have time for a 300-hour playthrough. This was the same amount of time as a regular playthrough to get through One Vision, and in many cases it'll probably be a lot smoother because you don't have as many random brick walls. But as far as Like, as far as Donalto in particular goes, though, having him as a revival tool did end up changing a lot of fights. So, like, this guy is definitely one of the more deployed of the group. All right, next we get the Juggernaut. Poison Claws, Mirror Shield, Heavy Armor, all of that kind of thing. Mainly, this shield is here to kind of balance out his defense. So, like, Mirror Shield is really, really good against spells, whereas Basic Armor is okay versus spells, not so good versus debuffs. This just kind of gives him good play against more or less everything, but this high res bonus tends to offset a lot of those potentially high accuracy debuffs and stuff like that coming his way. Gives him good overall defense. Most of his damage is coming from poison and finishers, but still, it's pretty solid. A combination of momentum and that freakishly high defense and movement means that this guy was more or less serving the Angel Knight's role before the Angel Knight got here. Being a lizard, he gets access to anatomy. We've got parry on there, and just like the soldier, he liked to get close and recruit stuff, so that's fun too. Steadfast for not getting knocked around as much, as well as Rampant Aura to keep stuff generally in place. Pretty basic, but either way, a fun little kind of side flanker and stuff like that. Now, the bird builds are kind of interesting. And you saw the bird builds. Basically, outside of the one that I gave a Ring of Finesse, for the most part, when it came to birds, I liked putting a Void Ring on them because it made their recovery time just criminally low to the point that they could serve as really handy distractions. And if you had, let's say, an entire flock of them, they would be able to just kind of roll in and completely decimate the sides of parties. And like, as long as the fights didn't last too long, you could just basically use them as a sacrificial drone swarm. So very, very fun stuff there. Next, the Octopus, probably my favorite of the beast units. For the same reasons that I mentioned earlier, like gigantic AoE poison damage, typically a huge bait for things like archers due to their relatively low defense and high health. So the AI is like, oh man, look at that big meaty target over there, and then they take those shots, and then you heal off 3 archer shots with a single cleric, and all of a sudden, guess what? Free poison rain for everybody, yay! But you got throwing rocks to serve as just kind of like a general purpose heavy archer for non-water maps, as well as being able to still train your water skill because you've got Instill Water on there. So you put Instill Water on your throwing boulder, bada bing, bada boom, lots of One Vision specific changes all coming in all at once. Not to mention, once you've got that going, you've got stuff like Black Mucus over here that's actually a really good way to spread slow as well. So it's a unit that's good both in melee, both in range, both in water, and on land. But yeah, I love the Octopus. Everything about it. I just freaking love this thing. Now, this is the Octopus Body Donor over here, where eventually I'm sure Nyx will end up dying, and then this one will just inherit all of their skills. Usually when it comes to monster units, what I like to do is just keep one just kind of assistant trained up so that if anything happens to the main one, they've got their skills unlocked in order to be able to just immediately transfer all that stuff over. And then we have a nice little backup copy, you know? Like, for example, I ended up losing one of the chickens a little while ago, and still need to go make a new backup copy for this one. Then we've got the Cyclopes over here with their funny little hats, and they're fun. Like, they're just fun in general. I've got a fire one, I've got an earth one. No particular reasons behind them, they're just sort of here. As far as their skills are concerned, there's nothing too nutty to write about here. I was just kind of playing around with them both. They were here just for the purpose of making a video later, truth be told. I didn't deploy them that often, but they served adequately whenever they were out. We've got Fear off of Glare. We've got Bad Breath, which just basically gets rid of percentage damage, basically an anti-armor move. Cross Chop, which just breaks things, which is pretty great. High rank anatomy plus cross chop is pretty nuts. Howl for the old stun goodies. In general, like, they're a heavyweight caster, right? They're kind of what you, as they were in PSP, they're kind of like everything that you wanted out of the PSP Terror Knight. Just made into a more actual functional package, except now they're just more fun because it's One Vision. Alright, then we got the Golem over here doing just typical Golem things. Hardcore core on him. Damage reflection because he's weak to it. Augment Earth to improve his skills a little bit. Rampart Aura for blocking things. Anatomy for, you know, hitting things. Shockwave, Heaven's Terror for taking some nice little Hail Mary shots and an AoE. But most of the time he's just spamming Gorge and Lock and being a walking barricade. Then we got Shamgu the Trickster. like I already talked this guy up in the Trickster episode. Like he's got the flight sword over here for being able to fly around. We've got high evasion, high accuracy, and then we've got his guaranteed poison stun kind of kiss type stuff. Every now and then he gets an opportunity to use the Vampiric Kiss, which basically steals most of the health out of something and resets their speed to nothing, so just absolutely eats them. So, good little stuff there. We got this guy. He was previously a Patriarch. Now he's a Berserker. He's terrible at it and has basically been knocked out in every fight he's been in. Don't copy this. Moving on. We've got the Familiar. I believe I talked about this in one of the videos recently. If not, either way, another one of my personal favorites. Decently high evasion because Fairy. Reaver Ring ends up giving you a lot of evasion there as well as pretty much all relevant stats that something like this could need. Stop Ward to make sure that they're not running into binds constantly. Speed Star for improving their speed without wasting any MP. We've got a book for boosting their MP in case they want to do the casting thing, but also beating the shit out of lizards. Additionally, higher MP means higher MP generation, but more importantly, it gives her a racial bonus that she can then tag into her short bow. The short bow is already really good against ultra lightweight stuff, but combined with a racial bonus, it also means that whatever you pick for this first slot, additionally, she's got a pretty hefty bonus versus them too. So you combine the book, you combine the bow, you combine the relevant racial skill, and she is basically just running siege bow damage off of a short bow. Pretty darn good stuff. Raider Vest, as always, keeps her from getting bullied, and then the scale arm guards for additional damage here. She is only slightly more bulky than some units around, but this is a very good generalist. Turnshaw here is just a dedicated offensive long-range spammer, so she sits right out of the line of contact, uses extend constantly, as well as the occasional conserve RT, or RT rather. Spams her spellbook for free MP, and then just basically spams dead shots and self-hides from a distance. Nothing too fancy here, pretty straightforward. Kane, I mentioned this guy before too. Lots of weapons with a mind bonus, lots of gear with mind bonuses. 3 of his slots are dedicated to mind bonuses, as well as ice magic over here for the purpose of getting rid of TP. Heavy units are weak to debuffs. This counts as a debuff, so he goes and removes their TP, which basically shuts down things like disembowel, which means that he is a lot more safe when he's going in for his Slayer attacks here. If it's something that would survive, let's say, a Slayer Lombardia, he would then go and poison it with a crossbow and then hit it with a second Frostbite first. If not, then he just kind of, let's say, maybe he can get close by using a couple of Impales or an Ice Over, and if he doesn't need to do either of those things, he'll just kind of go in for the Slayer hit, oftentimes with the crossbow itself. So, either way, good heavy armor to usually take that hit, but it does give him a few more options as to approaching his preferred targets, while also giving him a good amount of just general purpose weapons for dealing with everything around him, whether it's poison, whether it's magic abilities or whatnot. He can be seen as a heavyweight missile spammer for the purpose of, let's say, anti-melee unit stuff, or let's say spamming his crossbow shots for more lightweight type of things. Just kind of taking sort of spray and pray type of approaches there. Recovery time on the crossbow is definitely not bad, being that it is one of the lighter variants, so either way, that's nice. Okay, so that's more or less about that. Also, Fear Ward on the Lombardia is pretty good when trying to attack a Cyclops. Alright, next up on the I Frickin' Love It pile, we got Robert the Knight here with his unique flying boots. Heavy armor, flying boots, seal of vigor, gives him a good amount of overall tankiness. Usually he's not getting targeted. We get stuff like the Power Fist, and originally his build was basically run up, punch something with a Power Fist, and go for a recruit, which works reasonably well, except for recently, as of the most recent patch. It sounds like it's being fixed in the next patch. The Power Fist was made a little bit too overpowered, so comparatively speaking, it basically always did more than his sword. But all that being said, honestly, even in that particular instance, it's fine enough. But either way, steadfast, he's flying around, he just basically flies above the group, gets in there. If somebody needs rescuing, he blocks any incoming attacks and throws out an Aegis. If he's, let's say, feeling a bit more aggressive, he lands in the middle of a group, throws out a Phalanx, completely subdivides the entire area. Let's say he takes his next turn, throws out a second Phalanx, then flies back to his own group, goes back to providing support or what have you. Oftentimes being able to just entirely segment off entire areas, very, very useful for Palace of the Dead. Alright, Saria doing her Geomancer thing. Nothing's really changed about her since the Geomancy video, just Gorgon Lock plus Pike. It's really good. Lambert the Swordmaster, fun little combination here of a Scout Vest for additional movement, Cloud Shoes for getting rid of Leaden, as well as, like, this just basically counteracts the thing that he was getting targeted by archers all the time. But this combination of Ulfbert to open up with a Stagger and then go for Katetsu for sleep. Generally, it's a pretty good combo. He's not very good at the dancing type of stuff here. And generally speaking, his preempt is really just kind of there. Usually what this build is particularly relying on is going up, double attacking something, and immediately throwing on a steel stance, and then just repeatedly doing this, attempting to put stuff to sleep. It actually works really well. It's a basic, just like hit, attack, spam, steel stance type of situation. Hey, I mean, if it works, right? It's mostly kept him alive. He did lose both. It's actually a funny story. Early on in the save file, I actually had 3 Hawkmen, and I was like, you know what? We're just going to test out a bunch of random shit on these Hawkmen until finally there's just one that sticks out. The other ones were dead, but on his final life, Lambert here was given this build. And he's the one that made it. The other Hawkmen were sacrificed to science. Then we got Ivan the Ninja over here. I forget if I talked him up at some point, but basically double movement. We've got the rail bow on him. He goes for kind of long-range snipes with his crossbow. Uses the main gauche for its evasion. Occasionally, if something gets close, he goes for a shackle using its melee attack. Scout Band is here to give him trajectory, which is pretty useful, as well as giving him resistance, as well as, Raider Vest for, again, kind of reducing aggro from ranged attacks, as well as the Seal of Wisdom here for helping out with his kind of casting type abilities, as well as his resistance. So he's a nice little kind of middle ground between a lot of very specific resistances here. But again, long-range sniper, occasionally gets in close for the shackle plus sleep bomb. Other than that, he's trying to run away with double movements, stuff like Wild Hunt and whatnot. So, yeah, nice little cozy thing there. Like, it is possible for him to shoot, move, and then double move. So, there's that. Alright. Let's see, Cressida, already showed her before. Basically, 2 books, racial skill, just annihilates with books. It's kind of hilarious. Her teleportation ability gives back both HP and MP, so she can abuse this in many, many maps. D-Cell Sydney here was the Freya / Paladin. She's here for testing purposes. There's very little that she did for the party that others haven't, but basically she's your Lancelot, but super early. And or if you would have had Ravenous, there's that as well. Really have not done that much with her. With Kashua, I was sticking with a fencing sword here. This build actually ended up working really well. While she does usually attempt to go for various types of MP draining moves from things like Covenant or Life Force or stuff like that, in order to go straight into the unique Grim Dawn ability that the Heretic gets. One thing that was very useful was a sword into Iron Maiden, since both of them are 2-tile range, allowing her to safely bully something and then just steal a bunch of health and whatnot. So, interesting kind of anti-armor rapier type situation, even though that's not really necessarily what it was designed for. It ended up working out pretty decently well because of that particular skill combo. We got Asleston here as a Buccaneer. I was running him as MP Claws plus this thing for a decently long time, and then I went double swords for a while. He's just a typical double attacker type of situation, really. Nothing too nuts, blade focus. Like, he does the usual Buccaneer thing. You give him a couple weapons, he dual wields, and then he just, like, runs up and tries to recruit lizards. So that's kind of about that. Like, out of the box, his lizard recruitment odds are freakishly high, so just something to potentially consider. Then I decided to remake the Ice Lich, which, yeah, like that one's pretty self-explanatory. As far as the Ice Lich is concerned, it's just like straight offense all the time. And I will have a video on the Lich relatively soonish, but like, it basically comes down to nothing short of just like pure, just offensive, just like annihilation from start to finish. Like directly just all int bonuses all day, just like across the board pure glass cannon type of stuff. And in her case, it kind of works. The reason for it is because the Lich is one of those ones that, while they may be exceptionally frail, they can just, let's say, run forward, drop a Mind Blast, then follow it up with another ability, oftentimes resulting in a one-shot versus many enemy types. So that's pretty cozy there. If they ever run out of MP, they not only can just go physical attack plus Mind Blast, since cudgels are pretty strong at this point, they can always go Covenant in order to steal the HP or the MP from the enemy party. Clarity and Efficacy means that Mind Blast plus basic spells are usually a generally positive movement as far as MP goes, that you can basically just keep paying for other abilities using that. Draconic is just kind of here for the sake of being here. And this is, like, her one-shot potential is her at rank 1 of Augment Ice. Like, if I hadn't switched her out of her previous augments and she had other stuff going on, this would be a very, very different story. So, just, yeah. Mostly the combination that I like using with her is that she is supposed to pair in with my matriarch over here, who has fire spells, and she's got a fire spear, and the general idea is that she goes for all those fire abilities, sets up an evade, and then just spams fire and melee support moves, whereas the Ice Lich then comes in, takes advantage of all those Iceverses, and just breaks things. So that's all solid stuff there. Let's see. Lindo, I already did the Commando video, basically said everything I was going to say about him there. Throws out grenades, has a cool gunblade. That's kind of about that. Gamp didn't use much. Rudlam haven't had a chance to use much yet. Tafina ended up getting the rogue abilities that Sarah left behind. So just generally high accuracy, running around stealing things as you do. You crossbow things, you steal things, you coax things. Like, what do you want? Booby traps, really darn good. Very good for setting up support abilities or for trapping particular staircases and stuff like that. Sneak attack is exactly okay. It's definitely a lot better for different units, but it's occasionally been useful on her. But she's a little bit of a basic type of unit. Got Mr. Bjarni over here, the dagger and pistol fusilier. He's alright. Like, this combined with first aid, it's a nice little support thing, I guess. Pumpkin Stopheles with his warden here. He's tried to keep up with the Valkyrie. He's trying to be the Earth Valkyrie with an axe over here. This is more or less like the March of the Black Queen, Dark Knight, Terror Knight type of thing. Except it's, golems. So it's fun. It's fine. Nothing too crazy to write home about as far as these guys are concerned. But again, already did that video a little while ago. And suddenly yawning, apparently. Okay, not sure where that came from, although I did have some really weird dreams yesterday. Anyway, okay. Let's see, just kind of water and fire on her. This was, again, part of that whole thing of I just wanted to put in some Purify users / Quench users on the team. So she's fun enough. I don't think there was much of a reason to switch her over. Oh yeah, the absolutely all-in recruitment hoplite. So, this guy is basic as hell, but also one of the most consistent people on the team. Also, he's somebody that has died 3 times prior, and also has been just recruited and salvaged into a new hoplite several new times. So this is the Farampa hoplite. Basically, the skeleton trio has a hoplite in there. And this particular guy, at different occasions, he's had different things. This is why he's got maxed out spears. It's why he's got augment lightning, augment water, all these different things in different ranks. And the reason for this was because originally I had an axe guy, I had a spear guy, both of those died. Then I had an axe and spear guy, then that one died, and then this guy was just like, well, power fist, dynamo plate, gauntlets, seal of might, axe, just all in for full strength bonus all the time, and then just deal 2/3 of something's health, go for the recruit. Take the one shot, go for the recruit. And the combination of the strength and bonus off of the power fist, the strength bonus in general off of every piece of equipment, on top of axes already hitting pretty darn hard, on top of the fact that I've got several water users on the team, on top of his augmenting that lightning, and everything else has meant that he's one of the most prolific recruiters on the team, because that's just what he does all day, every day, just straight up just that. And then finally there was Vulcan Raven, the shaman, who is still getting trained up, but at least he got his first few kills over there in Hanging Garden, so We'll cover more on him later, but he makes the skies all clear, and he also makes them all stormy, and it just kind of depends on the day how that's going. Anyway, that's kind of about that. So that's the builds from this particular playthrough as of so far. Obviously, getting into post game next, and obviously there's like a million other things to actually go do first. But in general, I gotta say, like, One Vision has come such a long way. It's such an incredible mod. Like, it genuinely just feels entirely like its own game, and yeah, there's no reason to not continue loving it, you know. Um, so yeah, it's super impressive how cohesive it all is, how it manages to kind of keep the random spawns of the PSP version, but keep the sort of guaranteed drops and stuff like that from the Night of Lotus and SNES versions, keep the kind of overall pace similar to something like Reborn there. Like, I love how the fact that almost every one of these weapons, like the fancier variants, like, you see a, like, you know, fancy shiny Dragoon in Palace of the Dead running around with the procs. You see an enemy unit holding the Zephyros. You see it like a boss holding that thing, or you know, you see some, like, I think it was Juggernaut with the Ember Wake, or like any one of these things. You always see the unit going and carrying it, and it's just cool to have them associated with a kind of mini boss of sorts, you know. Anyway, though, that's about that. So I gotta get going. This is way longer than I thought it was actually gonna be, but yeah. That is about that. This mod continues to get a 10 out of 10 for me. One hell of an adventure to this day, and yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you for stopping by, and y'all take care.